Hello Daily Drafters and welcome to the format follow-up video for March of the Machine. While some might consider this to be an all-time great set, it is now unfortunately time to say goodbye in true Daily Draft fashion. And what that means exactly is that in this video I will provide you with color pair tier rankings followed by my top 10 takes on the format. If you have any desire to draft March of the Machine again in the future, such as a flashback draft on Arena or at home with your friends, this will be a great video to reference to give you a quick reminder of how the format shook out and what to be looking for during your revisits. With that out of the way, let's dive into today's video. Starting with the tier 4 decks, I've got blue-green, green-red, and red-white. I was skeptical about the whole transform theme before the set came out, and it turns out that skepticism was proven true. It wasn't powerful enough to be caring about how many transform permanents you had, and it was far too slow as well. Green-red and red-white both wanted to be aggro decks, but red was so bad that it really couldn't support these strategies, which is why I had these two decks in the bottom tier as well. In tier 3, I have black-white, black-green, and black-red, a trio of black decks. Black-White had the worst win rate according to 17lands.com, but I still think that if you had enough of the uncommons and rares, the deck could be incredibly powerful and synergistic. Black-Red also relied on synergy and didn't come together very often, but when it did, it was explosively synergistic, and Black-Green was a bit more of a collection of good cards, ramp, and removal rather than Black-Green Incubate, but that was enough to keep it out of my bottom tier of decks. In tier 2, I have Blue-Red and Green-White. Blue-Red is the first deck that I've talked about today that I was actively happy to end up in. A ton of the instant speed Convoke cards in tandem with several cheap creatures and token makers made for a difficult deck to interact with because you never really wanted to target their cheap creatures with removal. When it comes to Green-White, I'll admit that this deck didn't come together often, but when you got access to a great version once every 10 drafts or so, it seemed near unbeatable. A curve of Enduring Bond Warden on 1 into Botanical Brawler on 2, followed by a few more backup creatures, was usually enough to just win most games. And finally, in tier 1, the two best decks in the format, Blue-White and Blue-Black. I don't necessarily care which of these you have in the number 1 spot, as they are both incredibly deep and great decks, but I personally have Blue-White Knights at the top. This deck seemed nearly forcible in almost every draft, which is insane considering it's a tier 1 deck. Maybe others undervalue the aggressive Knight cards, but I had all sorts of success with this deck. When it comes to Blue-Black, it acted as more of a control deck in the format, and cards like Ifara's Dispersal and Final Flourish made it tough to stick threats that could pressure your opponent. Now, we'll go ahead and dive into my top 10 takes on the format as a whole, but before we do, a quick message from me. Thanks, me. The Daily Draft Patreon page has a new tier, and it is not one you're going to want to miss out on. For just $5 per month, you can gain access to my tier lists for the format for not only Pack 1 Pick 1, but also customized for every single draftable deck in the format, and I update it every week. And you get access to a private Discord channel in which to discuss these tier lists with me and others. I use a traditional A through F rating for every single card. I let you know if the card has moved up or down since last week, and I give you the ability to hover over the card to see the name and a picture and a clickable link to Scryfall for every single one of the cards. And like I mentioned, I've also got customized tier lists for every single individual deck in the format. Blue-White Knights, looking for specific tier lists and ratings for every single card in Blue-White Knights, we've got it here for you, as well as every single other deck in the entire format. My Lord of the Rings set reviews are right around the corner in just about a week or less, and I will have these tier lists updated for the new set before it even releases. So now is the absolute perfect time to get in on the Centaur Courser rewards tier in the Daily Draft Patreon. If $5 is a bit too rich for your blood, we have $3 and $1 tiers that each come with both early access and admission to the Discord server. If a monetary donation isn't your speed, a subscription to the channel is also greatly appreciated and contribution enough. Number 10. Battles were largely underwhelming. We got a flashy new card type in March of the Machine, Battles. Nobody knew how good these cards would be and how much the format would revolve around them. Turns out, not that much. Now, don't get me wrong, the best of these battles were insanely good cards. Cards like Invasion of Amonkhet, Fiora, and New Phyrexia were just stupid. But in general, most uncommon and rare battles were pretty underwhelming if you didn't flip them, and it's not every game that you got to flip the battles that you cast. Number 9. The Multiverse Legends slot was a great idea, but poorly executed. We've seen this flex spot in boosters several times now, and overall, they're a resounding success. Bringing together dozens of legendary creatures from Magic's past to fight the last fight was very flavorful and fun to see older powerful cards return, but when you include cards like OG Elish Norn, Ragavan, and OG Shieldred, it's just too much. Not to mention, many of the rares, which showed up a lot more often than you might think, warped the format in such a way that it wasn't advertised as from the start and kind of took away from the whole set. Number 8. Incubate ended up being the best new mechanic of the set. Deciding when to spend that 2 mana to flip that Incubate token, or whether or not to use that Temporal Cleansing on their 5/5 unflipped token were interesting decisions in the format. They managed to strike an impressive balance to make sure that these tokens weren't too slow or too powerful, and it actually led to Incubate being the most successful new mechanic of March of the Machine. Number 7. The official Daily Draft color rankings. In 5th, and noticeably so, I have red. In 4th is green. In 3rd, narrowly edging out green, is white. In a clear 2nd, I have black. And in a runaway victory, I have blue in 1st. Number 6. You should almost always pay the life instead of the mana to flip your Phyrexians. If you're in a 2-color deck, deciding whether or not to play that creature that can flip into a Phyrexian, but you don't have access to the color of Phyrexian mana needed to flip it, fear not, include it. Paying the 2 life to flip these creatures was trivially easy and should be done about 90% of the time. The only time you should pay the mana is if you have nothing better to do with it, or you are very low on life. Otherwise, use your life as a resource. Number 5. The top commons in each color. In blue, I have the best common in the set, Preening Champion. In black, I have Deadly Derision. In white, I would accept a couple of different answers in different situations, but I have Angelic Intervention. In green, I don't really like my pick, but it's the best I could come up with, and that is Cosmic Hunger. And in red, Volcanic Spite still remains number 1. Number 4. Instant Speed Convoke is incredibly powerful. There's something broken about casting spells for free. All sorts of cards have been banned from several formats for letting you cheat on the mana cost of a spell so as to make it cost 0 mana, and there are several spells in March of the Machine Limited that let you do just that. Now, yes, you have to tap some creatures to make this happen as well, but the trick is that you don't have to spend any mana, and there's just not much more to be said for how powerful that effect is. Number 3. The team-up cards were difficult to cast in Limited, but incredibly powerful if you could. These cards were incredibly flavorful for the March of the Machine storyline, and I'm sure Commander players everywhere are rejoicing, but how did they play in Limited? Well, a bit difficult to cast is the answer. The XXYY team-ups couldn't be splashed, and the 3-color cards were as difficult to cast as 3-color cards in most formats normally are. However, if you were able to put a lot of these cards on the stack, they heavily rewarded you for jumping through their mana hoops, as many of them were incredibly powerful. Number 2. This format had a ton of bombs, but they were beatable with the right strategy. I heard complaints from so many people saying that this format was far too bomb heavy to be enjoyable, and maybe it's the fact that my favorite deck in the format was Blue-White Knights, an assertive aggro deck, but I found that a lot of these bombs were eminently beatable. The trick is not getting stuck in no man's land when deck building and making sure that you're either killing your opponent before they cast these bombs, or you have the bombs to compete with theirs. As a data point for you all, I had a deck with not 1, but 2 copies of Atali, a Rankle and Torbran, a Glissa, and a Jeru and Hazaret to cast some of them for free ideally, with multiple cheap removal spells and cheap creature roadblocks, and the deck promptly went 0-3. So decks like these were definitely beatable. And finally, number 1, life totals mattered less than they ever have before. So many games in March of the Machine were well over before life totals reached 0. I vividly remember several games in which I was at like 22 life and my opponent was less than 10, and I just knew I had little to no chance of winning. The reason is because if your opponent lands several battles and manages to flip them all without any contest from you, there was such a defeated feeling from that situation. Your life might be at 20, but they've flipped 3 battles and have so many more resources than you, and it was basically all over but the crying. Thanks so much for tuning into the channel for the life of March of the Machine, and if you didn't get to see many drafts, or you just happened to discover this format follow-up video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel to get in nice and early on the next format. We'll be switching focus to Lord of the Rings later this week and into next week with several set review videos. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you soon for more daily draft content.